Hello, it's Leontine from Little Lovely Crafts. I'm so happy I was able to order the new Fawn release in the Netherlands. So I received my order yesterday and I've been playing with it ever since. This is my first project. Once I saw the flip-flop images, I decided it was a cool idea to make them go towards each other. Now, Fawn doesn't have an interactive die to do that yet, maybe in the future, who knows? But I was able to use their existing interactive dies to make this possible. I hope you liked the video. I'm keeping the decoration of the car pretty simple. I've only stamped the two foxes and I'm going to be coloring them with YR 27, 24 and 21. And I'm using an E000 and R20 for the cheeks. I colored outside of the lines a few times, so I'm using my colorless blender to fix those mistakes. And I didn't want to leave the rest of his body white, so I'm using the E000. It was just a nice light color to color those parts in. I'm adding a few gel pen lines to make it pop a little more. To make one fox a girl fox, I added a flower from the Man and Terrific set and I colored it with RV52. Now the interactive bit. I made a test panel first to see how it worked, and now I'm going to make it for real. I have cut a piece of cardstock 5.5 by 1 3/4, and that's going to be the base for the whole pull tab thing. I will alter the first design a little bit, but it will work the same way, and I thought you should see how it would look with a white cardstock piece instead of acetate, because this is much more easy to see. I'm going to use the little piece from Snow Much Fun to cut the slots so I can pull some plastic through, and it's too small for the plastic strip that I had in mind, so I'm going to show you how I made the slots a little bigger. Because I want to make them symmetrical on both sides, I'm going to figure out a way to place it in a way that I can repeat it on the other side as well. And this is where my glass media mat is really handy, because it has all of those little squares. So I'm placing my cardstock at the top where there are thicker lines, and from there I can kind of see where I want to place that little die. And I decided that 2 of those little squares, I think that's about 1/2 inch, was enough to make the first slot. I'm lining up the left side of the die to the cardstock edge, and then I'm going to run it through the die cut machine. Before you run it through, you want to make sure that the top of the die is sticking out, because we only want 1 slot and not 2. So here you can see that my top plate is going to cover the bottom slot and the rest of the die is sticking out. And like I said, we needed to make it a little bigger, so now I'm not measuring from the top of my cardstock but from the bottom, and I'm also placing that little die 1/2 inch from the bottom edge. And I like to feel if my die is falling into the previous slot, so that way it lines up and I don't get a wonky slot. Because I don't want it to move around accidentally in my die cut machine, I'm placing an extra piece of washi tape. I'm going to spin my cardstock 180 degrees, and then I'm going to repeat the same thing on the other side of the cardstock. And whatever you do, don't forget to partially run it through your die cut machine. Now I have this little pink strip of plastic here, and that's actually from a doggy poo bag. I got those really cheap and I just cut it up and it will fit through those little slots I made. And to make them stick together, I'm using some score tape. I'm not pulling it, I'm just gently letting it fall onto the score tape, and then I just press it together and I cut off the excess plastic. And I'm sliding the piece with the score tape as close as I can get it to the slot. Now the next die set we're going to use is the Let's Toast pull tab add-on, and I'm going to cut a little piece of white cardstock with this piece, and I'm cutting off the flaps, and this is going to work great as a pull tab, and it has the exact measurements that we're going to need. And I realized I also need a little notch to be able to pull the pull tab. I'm using my glass media mat again to line it up perfectly, and then I'm going to run it through the die cut machine. On my little test piece, I added my strip on the top, but now I'm going to attach it to the bottom of my mechanism. And again, I'm using score tape. Next up, I'm going to attach some acetate strips. I'm attaching the fox on the right side of my plastic, and I'm placing it on top, of course, with some score tape. Now this next strip is going to be more difficult for me to show you, but I'm going to talk you through it, I hope. What I did was I pulled up my plastic from behind, and then I'm gluing my little strip of acetate to the plastic. And then once it lies down, it is against the cardstock with the plastic on the back, if that makes sense. And now all of the difficult parts are done, and we can focus on creating the scene. And I'm just testing it to be sure that the mechanism is still working. I cut some white lawn fawn cardstock with the largest large stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to die cut one of them with the simple stitched hillsides. And I don't want to make a really curvy hill because I want my mechanism to be covered up by it. I also need to die cut a notch in my top layer, so I'm using the mechanism to figure out where I need to cut it exactly so they line up together. I'm using twisted citron and mowed lawn to color my hill, and I'm going back and forth between the colors, making sure that the darker color is on the bottom. I want to make some darker splatters, so I got this little box or booth so that my work surface is protected, and I'm using mowed lawn distress ink to make those little splatters. I thought it would be nice to make sort of a sunset scene, so I decided to put squeezed lemonade, some dried marigold and abandoned coral on the card. I had to go back and forth between the colors quite a few times to get the right blend, but I'm happy with the result. I decided to make the bottom green just like the hill, so if I glued my hill on a little wonky, you wouldn't see the white cardstock peeking through. And I'm using my liquid stardust mixed with water to get some nice shiny splatters in the background. The mechanism should be able to move freely, so I'm adding some foam tape strips, and that will lift up the cardstock from the back panel, and that way my plastic can move freely. And you'll make sure you're not going to put them around the acetate strips, because that might hinder the mechanism from working. So I'm placing it on the bottom, on the sides, and a little bit next to my acetate, but only on the places where it doesn't interfere with the working mechanism. Because I added my pull tab on the bottom, it needs to lift up a little bit. So I'm placing a foam square on the pull tab, but I ended up removing it later and just attaching it to the back panel itself. I'm placing thin foam squares on the top of my mechanism, and that is to make sure that my grassy hill doesn't interfere with the mechanism as well. I want the pull tab to stay flush with the right side of my panel, so I'm going to make a stopper. At the moment the pull tab has a lot of wiggle room, so I'm going to place a few strips of my foam tape around it so it doesn't move up or down too much. Now I'm going to try and figure out where I'm going to attach my foxes. I'm going to use a bit of washi tape to attach the panel to the mechanism just temporarily. That way I can figure out where I want my foxes and where I want my last stopper to be, because I want to make the foxes stop right where they touch arms. I'm going to use thick foam squares to attach the foxes to the strip of acetate, and I made the mistake of attaching those foam squares a little bit too low. Since my hill is curvy, they're going to bump into it. So make sure you don't attach them too low, but just measure how much room you're going to need. Luckily, it's an easy mistake to fix. A little bit of foam square is peeking from behind the right fox, so I'm just cutting it off. And here is where I want my foxes to stop, so I'm using a foam square as a stopper. I've taken care of everything, so now I can attach my mechanism to my back panel. And I decided I could use one more thin foam square in the center so that my grassy hill has something to lean on, and then I can attach my grassy hill on top as well. I noticed that my fox on the right needed half of a foam square to attach it a little better to the acetate. I planned on attaching my sentiment to the top of the card, but I think it is interfering with the mechanism. The foxes are getting caught on it, so I decided to just move it to the bottom, since the grassy hill is big enough to hold the sentiment as well. I finished off the pull tab by adding that extra piece, and I used a Copic sketch marker because a little bit of my white cardstock was peeking from the sides. I got some black cardstock, and now I am going to heat emboss, sanding and 2U on it with white embossing powder. Once that's finished, I'm going to cut them up in little strips and just place them around hugs. Since the card already has a lot of height from all of that foam tape, I'm going to glue the sentiments on directly to the cardstock. Off camera, the last step was adding it to a card base, and then my card was all finished. I'm so happy that the idea that I had actually worked out, and I also hope that I've been able to inspire you to make something like this yourself. Give my video a thumbs up if you think it was a good idea, and I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel. Can't wait to see what you will make. See you next time. Bye!